So, Todd McGowan, thanks once again for coming back onto Hermitix.
James, anytime. I love talking to you, as you know.
Yeah. So we're going to be discussing, Lacan, because you've recently published by, unsurprisingly, Cambridge University Press, the Cambridge Introduction to Jacques Lacan, and I actually put this in capital letters because I double checked, 194 pages, and Lacan is done. How did you manage it? And also, no, I want to say, last time we spoke, you said you were done with Lacan, so it did make me smile when I saw.
Yeah, well, it was like The Godfather. I got out and then they pulled me back in. So, a couple things. So that was their word limit. It wasn't my choice. So that I just had to obey that. And then the way I got into it was my friend Mari Rudy begged me. I said, no, 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 to co-write a book with her on this. Cambridge came to her to write it, and she asked me to co-write it. And then before she finished, we wrote a proposal, got accepted, but before she wrote, and I finished my half, and before she wrote anything, she died. So I I was sort of stuck, and the editor, which he was very cool, and he just said, if you don't want to do it, okay. But then I thought it'd be stupid to just leave it half done, and so
So a lot of it is Mary Rudy's.
no, none of it is hers. So
Oh,
she didn't finish any of
oh, I
hers.
see.
No, no. It would have been, she would have hated it, to be honest.
Really?
She would have hated, yeah, because a lot of the things that she likes, I'm pretty critical of.
Okay.
So the idea of the Santome, she really likes that idea, and I'm very critical of that. So it would be, I mean, some things we agreed on, but mostly we had a lot of points of disagreement. So it would have been interesting if she had co-written it. It would have been maybe schizophrenic as a book, I think.
As a book, it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of, and I want to say actually before we get into the meat of this, that you have recorded on your own channel, which I'm going to link, a sort of intro video to the intro book because,
Right.
there's all this stuff always around the Acree, which like for some reason all professors tell people to read the Acree, and it's like, well,
I
yes, that's
know, I
one of the
know.
worst things you could do. But I just want to say to people, like before reading the book, and maybe even before listening to this, go listen to your talk. So I'm going to try and not overlap with that stuff because a lot of but one place I want to begin actually, because we have all our discussions, I don't think I've asked you this. Was where did you begin with Lacan? Like, what was that an immediate response for you, or was it one of
No,
those
not at all.
things?
Not at all. Yeah, we've never talked about this, I don't think. So I was in graduate school, and I read the Alan Sheridan translation of the Selected Écrit, which is a nightmare. It's a terrible translation, and as I mentioned in the book, starting with the Écrit is a terrible idea. And so I just was pretty dismissive of Lacan. I just thought, he doesn't really have that much to say. And then I read after a kind of delay, not when it came out, but Slavoj's Sublime Object of Ideology. And the thing that really turned me, and this actually informs most of my take in the book, is the relationship to German idealism, which I was heavily invested in. And he made it clear to me that there was this link between psychoanalysis, but specifically Lacan, and German idealism, and specifically Hegel. So that was for me really eye-opening experience. And I think the first, then I can't remember. I think I read probably seminar 1 to 11 in a kind of, or maybe seminar 7. I read it pretty, and then I got pretty invested pretty quickly, and I was in a little group that read a lot of stuff from Lacan. So.
Okay. So as you are now the author, I mean, how do you feel about an introduction to Lacan? Because he's one of, maybe along with someone like Heidegger, a notoriously obscure writer. So do you feel an introduction is ironically too structural?
Uh, no, I kind of, I'm against that. Uh,
At least.
Obscurantism. Yeah, just I'm so jargon obscurantism. I'm totally against. So I think that, in fact, tomorrow there's a symposium on the book, and I'm going to be, I think, uh, raked over the coals for simplifying Lacan, which is fine. Whatever. I mean, that's just how I can't do it any other way. I find jargon and obscurantism really unnecessary, and so I feel like that's what people should cut through to the actual core of the ideas. So I felt like that was my duty in writing this book, actually.
Mm-hmm. So jumping back, because you mentioned German idealism, it's something that right at the start of the book, which is an interesting place to begin, is that when we talk about Lacan, one thing you point out two things is that people are consistently veering off with Lacan without realizing they're doing it, both in his phases, which we can get to, but also what exactly he is, because you know, psychoanalyst or philosopher is the big two, but there's also other things he can kind of fit. And so how do you think we should understand him? Because it seems to me then that for you, he's been actually more of a psychoanalyst who's a covert philosopher.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's exactly right. I don't deny that he's a psychoanalyst and he is important for a lot of psychoanalysts. I'm just not a psychoanalyst. So it would be disingenuous of me to write the book introducing Lacan as a psychoanalyst. And a lot of people have already done that. So I don't think that needs to be done. But to introduce him as a theorist, there have been a couple books, but for instance, Slavoj wrote a book called How to Read Lacan. And the problem is it's great, but it's just another book by Slavoj. It's not really an introduction to Lacan's thinking. So I thought, well, that's where there maybe is a need for somebody to write a book, and not as a clinician. I think my friend Danny Nobis wrote a really good book. Bruce Fink wrote a good book, and there's tons of people in France have written good books. So I'm not qualified, and it would be redundant. So yeah, and for me, his importance is as a theorist or as a philosopher, not as a clinician. But I don't deny that he's important as a clinician in any way. Yeah.
What distinctly changes when I mean, it's a pretty big question, but what distinctly changes about his ideas when we approach him like that? Do you think it is this, this philosophical history of the subject in relation to German idealism, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. I mean, that's what I focus on. And I think that's the real key. I think that's his key contribution. I think that's how you can think of it, right? That what would be, if you think of him as a philosopher or theorist, what's his key contribution? And it's to bring the psychoanalytic Freudian notion of the unconscious into the philosophizing subjectivity, because he does that. I mean, I think that's what he does in a way that I don't think there's another person who's done it. So, or after him, people have done it, but he was the one that really said, wait a minute, we can think the unconscious in terms of, we have to. And I think, and it's interesting because in a way, it's almost an accident of him being French. Not totally. Obviously, his thinking is what it is. But so in French, there's a distinction which Freud did. So Freud called what we call the ego for Freud is for Freud das Ich, the I in German, right? So there's not really, you wouldn't really make a difference between Freud wouldn't see a difference between subjectivity and ego, because he just linguistically, it doesn't exist for him. But then what's really interesting is that in French, the ego gets translated as the moi, or the me, right? So, and then that opens up this distinction between I and the je, or the I, or the sujet, subject, and the moi, the ego. So I think that the way Freud structured it, I'm not sure that Freud wasn't. I'm positive he never read Hegel, barely read Kant, so he wasn't really versed in philosophy. But he's not thinking about subjectivity in the way that Kant is the real starting point for thinking about subjectivity. He's not thinking about it like that, but Lacan is, and I think it's part of it. He gets this distinction between the I and the ego that Freud just linguistically doesn't have. So I find that a little interesting that there's this
I mean,
possibility.
is that a difference sort of between, I mean, ontology and psychoanalysis? Because it seems that, so I mean, that's creation of a structure. So do you see that as, well, do you see that as upsetting German idealism, I guess?
Well, I think Lacan certainly would say so, but the problem is that he has basically a terrible reading of Hegel. So he doesn't, almost every time, he says, I'm here going against Hegel. He's not. He's actually being Hegelian. And that's because his teacher of Hegel was this guy, Alexander Kojève, who had a very tendentious, and I think most people think today, wrong reading of, great thinker on his own right, but just his reading of Hegel wasn't great. And so that makes him think he's criticizing when he's actually not upsetting, but actually I think he's saying things that Hegel thinks but doesn't yet have the terminology or the conceptual apparatus to say, like unconscious. Like Hegel didn't have a idea of the unconscious, but if you read his works, you can see he's trying to get to that, but just doesn't have the way to put it. So I think that's what I would say, that in a way Lacan just pushes that a little bit further and shows where the unconscious and subjectivity align.
How is Lacan Hegelianly using the unconscious then?
Well, because he thinks that it emerges, and I think this is how Hegel sees subjectivity, that it emerges for one thing, that subjectivity is always divided, and that's how Hegel sees it. And Lacan is the one to say that divide involves the unconscious, that what we're divided from is this part of ourselves that we can't know. And Hegel kind of sees that, but he doesn't exactly, again, because he doesn't have this idea of the unconscious. So that's the main thing, I think. But the other way, and this, you got to this when you're talking about the structure, for Hegel, subjectivity emerges through a gap in what seems in the substantial structure. And that's true for Lacan as well. And Lacan, when he goes through how the symbolic order is structured, for him, subjectivity emerges right through the points of failure within that symbolic order, the points where things aren't just working out.
And yet you say he betrays Freud, but he returns to Freud.
Lacan.
Yeah. Lacan.
Yeah. I think, right. Lacan's whole project is a return to Freud. Do I say he betrays Freud?
Well,
when did I say that?
So no, you didn't say betrayed. That's my own projection, maybe. The subjectivity, I versus moi.
Oh, yeah.
So when he's returning, he's returning to Freud and immediately is, well, not eschewing him, but you say developing him?
Yeah, developing. I mean, I think he's getting at something that Freud couldn't quite think, but I don't think it's a betrayal. I think it's he's just pushing it a little bit further. What happened was that the emphasis on the ego became predominant in psychoanalytic circles, and that's what Lacan is really reacting against. And Freud was in a difficult position because when there are people that are ostensibly your followers, you don't want to be too critical of them. So I feel like he maybe would have been critical in the way Lacan was, but just wasn't. Especially when one of them is your daughter. So I think it makes it a little dicey.
So what
I'm talking about Anna Freud?
Yeah. What does that distinct? I guess the moment of leap between Freud and Lacan. Well, like obviously, I think as you said, it's the move away from the ego. But
yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think Freud is not invested in the ego, but I think you can read Freud in a way to think that he is. But I think you cannot read Lacan in that way. That everything about subjectivity is the ego is a short circuit of that. It's a way of avoiding the problem of subjectivity. So, in fact, there are Lacanian theorists who see that the fundamental drive is a drive to destroy the ego, to undermine the ego. So I think, and I don't think that's wrong. So I think that's a real that's a development of Freud's thought, and yeah.
Lacan would see that the balancing act, the equilibrium of the ego is an avoidance.
Right. It's an avoidance of desire, of drive, it's a way to try to, because for him, this is his most famous thing, unfortunately, is this idea of the mirror stage, right? Like and that in that work, he shows or tries to show how the ego is just illusory. It's just imaginary. It's just an image that we have. And so if it's that, then it can't serve this balancing function that many psychoanalysts think that it should serve. So that's his, I think for a lot of people, that's his great breakthrough, that he demolishes ego psychology. He spends a lot of time doing that, demolishing that.
And this sort of brings us to something that you point out pretty quickly, which is, as I'll quote you, Lacan's early aim is to turn psychoanalysis back into a practice that discovers the subject's singularity rather than encouraging adaptation to oppressive norms. So is this, as soon as there is this break, I'm sure there is a fair amount of Lacan, like before, probably like the very, very early Lacan.
Yeah.
But at this point, is it Lacan's project inherently politically radical?
I think so. It's interesting that he wasn't politically radical personally, but he was always surrounded by politically radical people, Maoists in the 60s and things like that. So I think that there's a really inherent, and he always was anti-conformist. So even when he was it's odd to say this, even when he's politically conservative, he's anti-conformist and thinks, because he's always about following the path of your desire against the pressure of the ego or of the big, what he calls the big other, the social forces of authority. So he always thinks that psychoanalysis is about breaking from that, because that thing that this is a very famous statement of his that the big other doesn't exist. So that thing that you think you're conforming to, it doesn't really, you've conformed really to something that you've just supposed.
Something, the structure of the ego.
Right. But also something that you've supposed in the others, like that they want this thing of you and they don't even care. Right. So that's the real, for him, that's the real radical break, that you don't have to, you shouldn't be conforming to this thing that doesn't really exist.
But isn't that sort of almost infinitely, I mean, we've stumbled into this problem with Lacan all the time as it's language based. Isn't that an infinitely sort of recursive problem? Because one would be, it's like to quote Zizek, to use Zizek, that great metaphor of throwing rocks through the school window. One is a rebellion of, and projecting something onto the other, that your rebellion is something that they wouldn't like. The teacher comes out and ruins it, which, garbles the whole thing. But both sides is still a binary where both would be presupposed, if you see what I mean. So don't you end up in a recursivity if one is they care about this, the other cares about this, and the other is like, I've let go of my care. There wouldn't be assume for Lacan some sort of complete pure void where you can act in some sort of Lacanian political freedom.
No, right. I mean, it's never totally free, that you never, because there always is this background of some kind of structure against which you act. But he does think that you can, by this, he has various terms for it. So one term might be subjective destitution, like not like giving up that investment in the other. You do get a measure of freedom, I think, in his eyes, and because you're no longer invested in what it means to conform to those demands. So I think that he does think there's a measure of freedom in that, for sure.
This seems like a good place for the politically homeless, if you agree with that term.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think I don't disagree with the term, and I think that I think that Lacan really right. There's a kind of, I mean, Slavoj, and I do it too, try to marshal Lacan for the left, but I do think that there's a way in which he's kind of more uh there's more of an openness to what he's doing, because it doesn't have it's not necessarily, it's more uh it's not a collective project, right? And I think this is one of the things that people have criticized about Slavoj, is that all of the acts that he envisions, I don't think this is a fair criticism, but are individual, like Antigone or whatever. Right?
Well, what I meant by that, I guess, is to get away from, in the sense that you're moving away from this adaptation, this equilibrium, and let's say enjoying one symptom, or knowing the symptom, and then moving towards it, not I guess not repressing it. But politics is completely out of the bounds of left and right. But equally, this brings into the problem of, for Lacan, the subject is basically communication, because none of these desires would really exist without a relationship with the symbolic. And so this sort of individualism doesn't really quite work. I'm not sure. What I'm trying to say is a politic, like an ontological politics that is, in terms of quality, is away from the quantity of left, right, red, blue. Like, one's politics actually becomes something that has a relationship with, I don't know, it might even be like a sexual desire or something. Right. In fact, moves away from Democrat, Republican.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's how Lacan conceives it, but to the extent that he even cares about politics, I don't even think he cares about politics much.
No?
No, I mean, he never talks about, I mean, the times he does, he's just basically making fun of leftists. So, in May 68, he made fun of leftists for trying to break down all limits of society. He thought that was a silly project. But I would just say that I don't think he thinks the symbolic order is about communication. And I think otherwise I think what you said is correct, but I don't think he thinks the symbolic order is not about communication. It's about a structure that then we that we orient ourselves through. But he's radically against the notion of inner subjectivity, or I should say he becomes against it, because early on he does use the term positively, and later on he doesn't. And it's because he thinks that, and that's why he would say, okay, we're not communicating. Like, even what we're doing right now, he would not call that communicating. He would call it signification or signifying. But for him, that's different, because it's not like one subject has an idea and then communicates it to the other subject. And this is because he thinks so radically about the role of the unconscious, that the unconscious is, you're not even, for him, there's not an origin point in the subject. Like, the subject is always out in its word. So it's not first I have the idea and then I try to communicate it to you. It's the idea it only occurs through the signifiers for him. And then what I'm saying, I'm often saying things that are at odds with what I intend. So I think he's very against this idea of intention, or he thinks intention is imaginary, that there's no, what you intend to say. And this is a good psychoanalytic idea, I think, that what you intend to, so if I said, oh, I'm talking to you, I say, oh, Hillary, sorry, James, like that, when I slipped and said the name of my spouse, we'd have to analyze. We'd say, but I said, no, I meant James. What I meant would be unimportant. What matters is what I actually said, right? So that's why Lacan is not, for good psychoanalytic reasons, he's against this idea of communication.
So we're always talking to ourselves?
No, we're not even, we can't even talk to ourselves, right? Like we're always out in the other like that's where we're talking. So we're always, our unconscious is always manifesting itself in ways that are not accessible to ourselves, but are accessible to the other. But it's not, so he's against communication, not because everything is solipsistic, but almost for the opposite reason. That because we don't have this starting point from which, okay, I have my idea, now I want to communicate it to you. It's more, the idea is just in my articulation of it, and how you receive it is much more significant than what I intend.
So the whole thing for Lacan seems to me now like a big game of Winnicott's peekaboo. Our unconscious sort of constant bubbling is, I exist, like this is proof I exist.
Yeah.
Would Lacan disagree with that?
But, well, I think he would see something in that he's very critical of Winnicott, because he thinks Winnicott believes in this self that I was just saying,
the core.
Yeah, the core that he doesn't think exists. I was just reading in Seminar 12, which was just released. He exactly criticizes this idea. Yeah.
The reason I said communication is because the symbolic, maybe communication was the wrong word, but I say that now you've told me off.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
I'm kidding. No, the reason I say that is the symbolic doesn't make any sense without the signifiers of the symbolic being
true,
being understood as that which also we believe makes sense to others.
Right.
Like
right. Exactly. But the key thing is that it makes sense to others, not that we are. That's what he does. Again, that's what he doesn't believe in. That I have this idea that I'm then communicating. The other side, he thinks that the signifiers are received and interpreted and that kind of thing.
So without I'd always do this. I always just try bring in anomalies into thinkers and just try break them. I've been listening to old episodes and I realize I always do this. Without the other, there just wouldn't. Like just there wouldn't be.
There wouldn't be anything.
Yeah, there wouldn't be anything.
Right. There's no.
So that's what I mean by communication, because for Lacan, the whole thing does rest on a reciprocal. Can we say a reciprocity? Like
but it's not reciprocal. That's his point. It's because it's on the side of the other, and that there's no person there sending out the message, right? Like he's very insistent on this, and maybe he's wrong, but he's very insistent that what you're saying is caught up in this web of signifiers, and you are not the master of what you say. So that's why he would be. But it's almost like the other is the master of what you say, because the other receives it and interprets it.
But I've co-created the other, really, right? Or would that be the big other? Sorry.
No, I mean, you're right in a way, right? You're part of, like, you're okay. Sorry, I made this more confusing than it is. But the idea, when he says the big other doesn't exist, what he means is the big other is not a consistent entity, right? Not that there's no other out there receiving signification. So just that it's not consistent. So it can't provide a support for your identity. But there is, in another sense, there is a big other there that controls the realm of signification and allows, orients us in the realm of signification. So that statement, there is no big other, is both true and not true, because it's true only in the sense that the big other is not solid and consistent and reliable so that you can base your identity on it. So if I get recognized by the big other as a great football player, I really have something that I can hold my hat on. No, I don't. But in terms of what I'm saying, the big other is there mediating everything that I do say. So that's the complication.
So what? I mean, we'll see what Lacan we manage to throw in within an hour.
Yeah.
When we go back to Freud, with once again this difference between the I, which seems to me to be more ontological, and the moi, does Lacan then still hold that there is, that which says I, like consciousness? How is he understanding the two?
Yeah,
The moi in relation to consciousness, I guess.
yeah. So the ego, the moi is just this illusory self identity that I have, right? So would I see myself as whatever, a good parent, professor, all these things, American, uh, and subjectivity is this empty space from which my signification comes. And so there's a pretty radical difference between those two for him. And that subjectivity, and this is the key for him, is not substantial. So, and that's part of the critique of Winnicott, right? That he wants to hold on to some kind of substantial self. And for Lacan, there is no self. There's just this divide that is subjectivity that then asserts itself through what it says, and especially asserts itself through saying what it doesn't know, right? Through its unconscious articulations. So that's how subjectivity is revealed to oneself. That you say something, and this is why he thinks analysis is so important, because you say things in analysis, and the analyst draws attention to, oh, did you see that you've just said that? And you say, oh, I didn't even know that I thought that, right? And so that's how subjectivity is revealed for him. It's revealed in the things that we don't know about ourselves and yet say.
So so would it be somewhat correct in saying the thinker is the thought, or the thoughts, which are,
Exactly.
I see a lot of
Right.
Heraclitus here, so they're fluxing and they're of that moment, they're of the symbolic, which is equally Heraclitean. The thinker is the thought, but the thoughts have obviously the layer of the unconscious. So the thinker is
Yes.
the thought.
Yes.
Okay. See,
Yeah.
now I was okay. Well, we figured it out.
Yeah.
But
That's good. That's
but
very good.
so I was talking to a friend yesterday, and I said to her, why can't I just hang out in subjectivity? And she said, James, you just want a lobotomy. You just want to be psychotic. Is that right? Because I honestly, the more you talk, I see Lacan as like a non-dualist, where for me, why can't we just hang out in subjectivity? And I like, because when I look around the room, maybe you can psychoanalyze me and I'll, whatever. When I look around the room, there is, all of this is pretty much unconscious, right? I'm not looking around and going like pencil, pen, mouse, like
Right.
that would be like symbolic gone insane. So
Right.
all of this is just unconsciously understood as being somewhere.
Right.
But why can't I sort of like metaphorically withdraw into subjectivity and just like be without that engagement?
Well, because I mean that's why Lacan thinks the subject is divided, and it's divided between subjectivity and its identity, and so you can't live without identity, and that's the thing you're saying. Okay, I'd like to withdraw from, right? Like all those aspects of identity, whatever, like your job, your apartment, your rent, your romantic situation, your friends, all those things are part of your identity. And Lacan thinks that, though he does think that in a way identity is a retreat from subjectivity, because it's investment in the symbolic structure against this negativity of the subject. But the problem is you can't just occupy one. You can't occupy one. It's a division, so you can't occupy one side or the other entirely, because the other thing is going to keep it's you're always going to be pulled to it. And so for Lacan, it's really a question of where do you place the emphasis in your existence, right? Like that's, I think, the
Well,
real.
I mean, who's you if you're placing emphasis on subjectivity, right? That's a paradox.
No, I think right. I think he does. I think he puts it on subjectivity, just like you said, right? Like that. Yeah. That, and not on symbolic identity, because he thinks, and I think most people do the opposite. Most people do the opposite. For most people, their symbolic identity is who they are. They think like Elon Musk, what is he? I'm this mass of wealth and this exploration, all these aspects of my good. Uh, I don't know how many kids does he have?
Yeah.
17, right? All that stuff. Like that's about some assertion of symbolic identity and retreat from subjectivity. But just like your friend was saying, you can't just retreat purely into subjectivity. Although, in a way,
I can try.
that's not far from Lacan's position, right? It's not
No.
far because he is saying that all those symbolic identities are false, and they're all ways of missing this negativity of the subject. So, uh, when you're invested in them, you have to have this distance from them because you have to know that because again, this comes back to this big other doesn't exist, because any recognition that you get symbolically is always going to be ultimately baseless.
Yeah.
And so that's, in a way, every time you recognize that, you are confronted again with your own subjectivity. So I think that's pretty cool. I think that's one of my favorite things about Lacan, this relationship between symbolic identity and subjectivity.
But I sense this is something that you've personally dealt with. It's just that you say about a confrontation with the subjectivity, but confrontation with the identity is once there's a transparent confrontation with identity, you see American as American. You see, you said about like wanting the full set of Freud books. Like once you see that desire for what it is, or notice the symptom, it seems to deflate. It reminds me actually of Stephen King's It, right? Like once they kind of just look at the clown, it's like, oh. But the more and more you do this, I mean, is this a dangerous thing to do?
No, I don't think it's dangerous at all. I think it's.
So what are you left with?
Well, I think you're left with I don't think it. Well, you don't have. I guess is it dangerous in the sense that. Here's why I think it's not dangerous, and maybe you'll say it's dangerous. I think it's not dangerous because those things are always substanceless in the first place. So it's not like you're coming to a recognition, oh, this thing that was great, it's now no longer great for me. No, what you're recognizing is this thing was never great for me, right? So that's why I don't think, if I don't get chills when the Star Spangled Banner plays anymore, that's probably a good thing, because those chills were always based upon an illusion that there was something substantial about being an American, or about being whatever Christian, or whatever things that I had invested in. And so I think losing that substantialization of the other, this is a Hegelian term, is only a good I don't think there's a danger in that. I don't think, because I think,
you think it'll just be replaced by another desire?
No, I don't think it'll be replaced, but I think it's possible to live like that. Like I don't think it, because I think then I think it opens the space for like real friendships, real love relations, real, enjoying different things. But without this thinking that, I don't think it means you enjoy them less. I don't enjoy watching football games any less because I recognize that it's substanceless.
Does the recognition even somehow add a different
maybe, yeah.
But there's some things you've told me about. I think about it. I don't know why I think about it as often as I do, but you told me, because I had the same experience, when you crashed your car. So it wasn't replaced with anything. You said, like, you just looked at it. It's like that.
Yeah. That was great. So that, to me, was an example of the liberatory or emancipatory function of that kind of switch, right?
So much of this is tricky using words here, but so much of this is fiction. You mentioned illusions and identity, and we could talk on masks as well. What's truth for Lacan? We sort of skipped over the phases of Lacan, by the way, but what's true?
Well, yeah, we did, which I make a big, probably.
You did make a deal about. Well, actually, we should probably make sure I get that in, because I think it's key, because one of the things you point out is that one of the things that so many Lacanians use, das Ding, is in a phase. Early
It's barely a phase.
Barely a phase.
Barely a phase. It's like it's a
So
Yeah.
are we cherry picking Lacan? And what
I think right. If there's one thing the book is trying to criticize, it's the cherry picking of Lacan. Not that I'm against finding certain of his concepts and then using them in your own way. Knock yourself out. I'm happy that people do that. But don't say, oh, Lacan thinks that I was watching a thing on, I don't know, France Culture or something, and the whole episode was devoted to Lacan's most important idea, don't give ground relative to your desire. And I'm like, really? Because that occurs in one seminar. He says it about 3 times, and then he never repeats it ever. So is that his most important idea? It's like, it's kind of crazy that was articulated in that way. So that's just one example. And that's actually the seminar in which Das Ding occurs. Also, he does mention it a couple times later, but basically it's gone. So I part of what I was doing was, and I again, I think you can pick out, and as long as you make clear, I'm picking out a certain part of Lacan's thought, not that this is Lacan's thought. And I guess to me, one of the things that I really react against is people merging things that come very late with things that come very early. And it just strikes me, those aren't the same. He's basically a different thinker at different points in his career. I mean, there's some things. The one thing that really stays the same is this tripartite division of experience of real, imaginary, symbolic. That stays the same. Although, even there, when he's talking about real in the early seminars, he just means like it's real. It's outside of, it's real.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, in seminar 8, he believes, not 1960 or so, he believes something totally different. That the real is this interruption within the symbolic order and has nothing to do with the solid real. So you can't, you see what I mean? So you can't really talk about even something as basic as that. It changes. Yeah. So
I mean, how could it be used as a thinker? You see him as a toolbox? And
I don't think that's bad.
I don't mean that.
No, I know you don't. Yeah, I don't think that's bad. And I think that's right. I think that's, I probably do that. Yeah. But I just don't think you can be true to the entirety of Lacan's thought because it's at odds with itself. That's what I think. So I think you have to pick a point at which you're going to invest yourself. Or if you're going to mix and match, you have to say, look, this is my own thing. I'm doing my own thing. I'm not being Lacanian here. And I think a lot of people I know think, oh, I'm being Lacanian, but they're mixing and matching things that don't go together, that are at odds with each other.
And this is where I think the sort of indictments on Lacan for being obscure come in, because he sort of has to be, otherwise he would have portrayed himself. If he as a thinker is taking the theories that he's coming up with seriously, then they are equally as fluxing as the theories are.
I know, James, and I think that's, to me, that's the one fair criticism, because he never says, you know what, he says it one time, but it's only when he's very late, almost after the seminars are concluded, and it's obscure the way he even says it, but he never says, I'm changing my idea of this. Like what I just said about the real, he never says, before I had this one idea of the real, and now I have this other. He just acts like I've always thought this, even though it's totally different what he says. And the worst one is, so he uses a little a to describe the objet, which is his most famous thing, probably. And early on, the little a means just the imaginary other. And so that's totally different than the objet. But he switches, and then he never says, and he says, oh, I have this formula from before, blah, blah, blah. It all is explained there. And I felt like, well, okay, it's explained, but only if you retroactively take the new thing back into the old thing. So he doesn't, that's where I think it's a fair criticism that he's, because it's fine to be, everyone's thought develops, your thought develops, my thought develops. That's totally fine. But I think you do owe it to people to say, okay, I used to think one thing and now I think another thing. Like I don't act like when I was in high school as a fundamentalist Christian that I think I really thought the same wild leftist thoughts that I think now. I don't tell people that. I mean, it's clearly I underwent some kind of a shift.
Yeah, which brings me back to the question I was initially asking: what's the truth? I mean, maybe this is venturing too much towards the core of Winnicott, right? Some idea of truth.
No. I think that this is one thing that's absolutely crucial about Lacan, that he believes in truth in a way that other thinkers of his time tended not to. So he's really against what I would call these other sophists that are thinking about, like Foucault and Derrida. He is not a sophist. He believes in truth. The only thing is he has a very famous, he gave this interview called on television. And he said, I always tell the truth, not the whole truth, because it's impossible to tell it whole. So he does reject this idea that you can have a whole, all-encompassing truth, but he thinks because of psychoanalysis, because of the unconscious, that you can tell the truth, and the truth is what you articulate through, and I think it's very important for him, through the fiction. He has this this is a totally Hegelian statement that he says truth is structured like a fiction. And his idea is that it's through the fiction you come to the truth at the point where the fiction breaks down. So that's for him what truth is. Truth is the point at which the fiction breaks down, we discover the truth.
Could you give almost like a literal example of that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a very literal example. So what was the truth of the Soviet Union, right? Truth of the Soviet Union was revealed in 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell, right? It was the unsustainability of that communist project was only revealed when at the point at which the fiction finally collapsed. And then we saw, okay, at the heart of this whole thing was something totally unsustainable that even the people inside didn't know was unsustainable. And certainly no one outside anticipated it. I remember in 1984, I was friends with a exchange student from West Germany, and she said the only way Germany is ever going to be united is if the East Germany invades us and takes us over. And she was just, that was 5 years later, that was an idiotic statement, right? But that, up until that time, it seemed like, but that fiction, when the fiction collapsed, then the truth of that whole order was revealed, I think. And I think you can think of a lot of, another thing that Lacan really, I think art really, and fiction novels play an important role for him. So let's take Antigone. Creon has a certain fiction about what it means to be a true leader and and what's true about that? Well, it's when it collapses, his wife and his son kill themselves after he's had this struggle with Antigone, right? Then his whole fiction collapses and that reveals the truth to him. So that's how Lacan thinks of truth. And he thinks also the same thing in psychoanalysis. Like someone comes into psychoanalysis, tells a fiction, lays out the fiction of their life, and then at some point that something falters in the fiction, it collapses, and then they say something that reveals the truth, and that's where the analyst intervenes. So I think his definition of truth is pretty consistent with the way psychoanalysis functions as a practice.
Do we often pile on a new fiction when that begins to be?
Of course, right. That confrontation with truth doesn't last long. He doesn't think.
Is that confrontation with truth one and the same most times, in the sense that we've been talking about, that it's that these things are just identity, that these are
right,
you can throw out like American job, career, blah blah blah, and throw it all in the same pot.
Exactly, and it would be the point at which those identities collapse, right? Or you see the groundlessness of them, the substancelessness of them. That would be the moment of truth.
And yet you're still going on without a lot of these. I use you as an example because you said, you've clearly dissolved a lot of these in a sense.
Yeah, but again, like I think, like seeing the truth as the fiction collapses doesn't mean that the fiction doesn't still operate, right? So I think it still can operate.
But
you just relate to it differently. You
sort of play around with it.
Well, I think you could. I mean, I think that it doesn't provide. Here's what I think it doesn't provide. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Mm-hmm. I don't think it provides a foundation for your existence, right? Like in the way that I think a lot of fictions provide for people, right? Like for instance, I think for a lot of people, a partner functions that way, right? If she or he is just a foundation for my existence. And then if you realize, no, there's a fiction, and then, and even if the person, it's a great love affair, they're still not going to be foundational. You're still, and I think one way to think of subjectivity for Lacan is it's like held up in the air, right? There's a net below, there's no foundation below. And that doesn't mean you don't still have, again, like these identities, these fictions that you're invested in, that you follow, but you just don't, you follow them without this sense of like they're providing some kind of foundation that I can operate from. And I think that seems pretty good and emancipatory, I think.
But I think there's an inverse there, though, because I see a lot in the consumerist West of people not wanting to maturing physically and in other ways, but not wanting to mature out of relatively juvenile interest. And it seems
it's incredible.
It's pretty incredible.
What you're talking
about. Yeah, it really is. It's pretty much return to the womb. But it seems in that sense that this kind of forced engagement with a fiction that's had its day becomes a sort of a adult. I mean, I'm going to sound like a real fun sponge here, but like adults are only at Disneyland seems like I get a feeling that it's jouissance, right? Like there's an element of pain here that you're really trying to.
For sure.
I want my child.
Right. I mean, it's incredible though. I think I was just talking to my students the other day, and for so many of them, their parent, or usually their mother, is their best friend, and I just thought that's such a sad thing. And I think that this refusal to leave childhood to me, that's just a symptom of the same exact thing we were talking about. Like that's someone who's completely invested in that fiction of their childhood, in the identity that provides for them. And they view, and I think this is I think because there's not socially, there seems to be less of these foundational things, right? People are clinging to their parents as this, I still have this secure foundation at home, and I'm going to stick with that. And then when they go to Disney, they feel like, I still have this secure Mickey Mouse, whatever. It's still a secure foundation for me. And I think I agree that is replete. It is everywhere, right? And the more things fall apart, I think the more that'll be, I think the wrong, but I think the response is to retreat into that kind of what seems like a secure foundation. Of course, it's not though, because your parents are just as divided and whatever as anything else.
Yeah. I always thought, I don't know if you ever had a moment like this. Some people, as you say, I'm not sure they do, but I always thought people debate the moment when you become an adult. I think I don't know if there's any single key moment. That would be a bit ridiculous, but I think a key one is when you first see your parents as people.
Right. No, I think that is the moment.
And I'll put this on the podcast, but I remember my first thought was I saw them as people, and I would not hang out with them.
Yeah, I think
sort of an overwhelming moment of separation, of a felt like,
yeah, I think that's true. And I think and then after you pass through that, you could hang out with them again, but first you have to pass through that kind of almost revulsion right?
The
Again,
stability was always a lie.
yeah, and then because then then I think you're right. I mean, I think that is a pretty good definition of adulthood because you lose uh, that sense of a foundation that they provide, and then you have to confront. And then I think most people switch from that to some other foundation. But the point is, of course, for Lacan, I think, and for me, to see that every foundation is fractured and not going to be really provide a real support for you. And so that then you have to come to terms. You have, I think there you can see a kind of freedom in that because you have to realize that you're just by yourself. You're just alone, and you're just in the foundation is nothing. You don't have
You're always
anything.
going to be vulnerable.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of fear tied up with Lacan, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, fear of him. I don't think. I mean, I think.
No. I mean, in his ideas, so many of these seem to be based around whether or not we could give up a certain. We're fearful of saying that this thing, whatever it might be, is not
That's no. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That he is a thinker of we have to overcome our fears. Right. That I think that's pretty great about him. I think I like that part because I think, and to be honest, I say this in the book a little bit, but he's such a Sartrean thinker, I think. And this what you said about fear fits that totally. That for Sartre, it's really about can you have the courage to embrace the fact that you're condemned to freedom? And I think Lacan adds the unconscious, so it's more complicated, but I think that's still basically the same thing.
And there's not really a you to hold on to.
That's right. That's right. Right. Sartre has more, right. He has more of a concrete thing to hold on to than Lacan does, which is different.
Do you think do you think there's a foundational fear for Lacan? One that connects all fears. Some people say their only fear is the fear of death.
He doesn't think that. No, I mean, I think for Freud, it's clearly the fear of castration. And I think for Lacan, that's true, except what Lacan does, and I think this is his maybe greatest move beyond Freud, is that he translates castration into symbolic castration. And I think Freud kind of thinks that, but he doesn't really say it. And so I think that is the fundamental fear. We're afraid of our symbolic castration. The fact that we're just lacking subjects. We're not solid. There's nothing solid we can rely on. And so it's not just our own symbolic castration, it's also the castration of the other, which is what in some ways is more traumatic for us, right? Because everyone can accept, oh, I'm just a poor boy, nobody loves me. And as long as you have someone else you can rely on, right? And Lacan's point is that's what you don't have. You don't have, and he tried to practice analysis that way. I'm not going to be this figure that the analysand can rely on. I'm not going to do that. So I think in a way, maybe that's more than fear of my own castration. It's fear of the castration of the other that is for him the fundamental fear.
No one's got it.
Right.
Well, I'll keep this under an hour, but I do want to ask. So when I interviewed Bruce Fink and I asked where to start, he said, read Seminar 1, read Seminar 2, read Seminar 3. Would you agree if that's someone's place to start with Lacan? Or other than, he even said actually don't read his introductory text. He just said go straight to the seminars, read them straight through.
No, I don't agree. I would read about 10 introductory books before I read any Lacan. And I don't usually say this. So about Hegel, I wouldn't say that. I would say read Hegel. But I just think, but I don't think Bruce is a smarter guy than me about Lacan. So I'm not sure I should contradict him. But I'm going to anyway. I think that's not bad advice because I think the early seminars are pretty easier. But I think, so seminar 11, the 4 fundamental concepts of psychoanalysis, he gave to, was the first one he gave to a larger audience, to not just analysts. And I think it's the most important and it's pretty readable. So I would maybe say that one. But I think Bruce's advice isn't bad because the first ones are pretty accessible, and they get progressively less accessible with the exception of the other one. And the only reason I wouldn't recommend it is because it's such a hapex. It doesn't really fit with anything else we've been talking about. It is Seminar 7, Ethics of Psychoanalysis. It's easier, and it has some fun stuff about Antigone, but it doesn't give you a good sense of the whole of Lacan. So
I remember right, Bruce. If I remember right, Bruce actually did say a lot of people start with 4 fundamental concepts. Don't do that.
No, he said don't do it.
Yeah. The only reason he said about that is because it's the one book that's been sort of like yanked out and has its own edition as if it's not like a part of the seminar.
Right.
So it's a common place everyone starts. I think his point was like it's often sort of detached from this.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think his advice was not.
You've just written an introduction.
No. I do think
money.
I do. No, I hope I don't. No, I think that I do think like Bruce's introduction is good. I think there's a lot of good introductions. Caleb Neal wrote a really good one. So yeah, I think those are good. And then I his advice isn't bad, but yeah, I like Seminar 11 best, and I think it's accessible enough. But then I think he's probably right to go back to 1 and 2 after that. The only thing I would say, in a little addendum to what he said, I think 3 is a little anomalous, so I probably wouldn't do that. And then I think 6 is probably, I would maybe go 1, 2, 6. And I think even if you want to get a good sense of the early Lacan, 6 would be a good place to start. It has a long discussion of Hamlet, so it really is, it has 10 sessions are devoted to Hamlet. So it really gives you a lot of practical reading of a text, which is helpful, I think.
Would you say be wary of Zizek?
Not at all. Not at all. No.
I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. But I mean, early on, do you think there's like a Zizek, Lacan?
Good.
That might confuse
yeah.
you.
If you read Lacan through Slavoj, good. I do not have any. This is not just me as a friend talking about him, but I think he's opened up Lacan to so many people that's been great. I don't have any, and I don't think he does a little bit of this picking and choosing thing, but I don't think I'm trying to think of a point where he's wrong, and I can't think of one. So I mean, I was once talking with this French friend of mine who's a real Lacanian, Guy Legoffet, and he said to me, I said, well, what about what Slavoj said? He's like, he's Hegelian. He's not Lacanian. So I think there are people that think that, but I think he's helpful. So, and I think the book by him, I wouldn't read the How to Read Lacan book. I would read Looking Awry, which is his second book. And I think it's a pretty good introduction to what Lacan has to say.
Okay. Well, how's your Death Drive book coming along?
Oh, it's coming fine, except, James, what happened? I got sabotaged in my own self-sabotaging book because I got a little note from Polity Press, right? Mm-hmm. And they said, oh, do you want to write something for our series called Theory Redux? And I said, oh, what about this Death Drive thing? And they're like, sure, but you can't call it Death Drive, and it can only be 25,000 words. And I said, well, I already got about 50, so I don't know what I'm going to do. And so I just ended up writing a whole new book called Self-Sabotage for them. So if they take it, it'll just be like a popular prelude to my Death Drive book. But if they reject it, which I kind of hope they do, then I'll just use all that stuff. Why do you want them to reject it? Well, because then I'll just use all that stuff in my Death Drive book. So that'll be...
You know they're not going to, though, now, don't you?
No, I don't know that at all.
I think.
Why do you say?
No, I don't. Because it's the thing you want to happen, and you're gonna have to.
Well, okay, maybe for that reason. But
it's a real Lacanian moment. It's like an annoyance, at getting. We've accepted your manuscript. Damn.
I know. Well, I always think I always assume people are going to reject my thing, and I always assume people are going to hate it. So when people like it, it's shocking to me. So.
Okay. Anything else in the works?
Yeah, I have this thing on. This is my long time project, which I'm going to do some. I'm going to write another little book. So I wrote that book, Embracing Alienation, and that press asked me to. So I'm going to do a thing called Universal Non-Belonging, which has been I've really been thinking about that and kind of writing about it in other places. So I'm just going to put that all together in one book. And then I have a book called something like Psychoanalytic Existentialism. So it's my bringing together of Freud and Sartre. So that's my lifelong project. So, but I've actually written a lot of it, so it's not a lifelong project.
It's gonna be a big one.
No, I don't know. Maybe I'd like to write a bigger book, but it's hard to write big books now because no one wants to publish them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, your Alienation one was pretty popular, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was way too popular for how bad it was. So, it was, man. I mean, the problem is the only one that I like, no one else likes.
Which one was that? I think
The comedy, my book on comedy. It's the only one I like.
See, my favorite of yours is the dissatisfaction one.
Oh, well, I really don't like that.
I know.
But it wasn't the end of dissatisfaction for me. That was
magnum opus.
Oh, wow.
That's what you're going to be remembered for.
Oh, God. That's crushing.
Well, I don't know. I'll put the links for your own talk and the Cambridge Introduction below. And I look forward to hopefully talking to you again about
James, anytime. It's always a joy for me. Honestly.